Chapter 671. Lord Adair had been very enthusiastic after receiving the rejuvenating pill, and he wanted to swallow it the minute he received it. After all, he had seen the magical effect materialize on Paisel after the latter had taken the pill, so he was very worried about damaging it when he held it in his hand. The only way to feel assured was to eat it. Since Alex had said so, Lord Adair nodded and said gratefully, "Okay, Master Anderson, I'll take it now." Then, he carefully put the pill into his mouth and swallowed it. As the pill was being digested, he felt that the pill had transformed into a stream of heat that surged into his limbs and veins, warming his body, and every cell in his body was full of vitality. It was as if he had returned to his teenage years, feeling youthful and energetic. Just like Paisel, Lord Adair felt that every part of his body had been nourished by the pill to the point that it was glowing with long-lost youth. Surprisingly, he found that the old wounds and illnesses that had lingered in his body for many decades were gradually disappearing, and the wrinkles on his face began to smoothen. And his skin started to tighten. He felt an itch on his scalp as well, and it seemed that new hair was starting to grow. Lord Adair was experiencing astonishing physical and internal changes right in front of everyone's eyes. He was slightly crouching in the beginning. He slowly stood straight and upright. His hair, although not all, was starting to turn black. The senile lines on his face had also faded to a visible extent, and his spirit and dynamic were completely different from before. If one were to say Lord Adair looked like an old man in his 80s earlier, now, he looked like he was in his 60s at best. In fact, he suddenly looked very energized and active, his dynamic eyes even suggested that he was a middle-aged man. Those who had dismissed the rejuvenating pill earlier were stunned by Lord Adair's incredible and supernatural changes. No one had ever seen such a miraculous sight, and even Faria was completely taken aback by the sight. The former rickety old man had now become a gray-haired middle-aged man. This reminded Faria of the time the old man had taken her into his arms when her father had passed away a decade ago and told her not to be afraid and that he would always be there for her. Her grandfather had only been in his 60s at the time, and right now, he looked almost the same as he did back then. In other words, it could be said that her grandfather's biological clock had been reversed thanks to the rejuvenating pill. It also meant that his life would be extended by 10 more years. Did that mean that her grandfather could live until he was 100 years old? Faria burst into joyful tears all of a sudden. The rest of the Adair family members did not truly care about her. When her father had died, they were grieving on the outside, but celebrating in their hearts, delighted that there was one less person in the inheritance war among them. As such, her only relative in the world who sincerely cared about her was her grandfather. So, of course she hoped that her grandfather could live a long life. When Lord Adair was dying, he had once told her that his biggest regret was that he couldn't walk her down the aisle. Lord Adair had said that Faria was the one he was most worried about because she had lost her parents since she was a child, and he adored her very much. She was also the only child who was the most sincere and filial to him. Hence, his biggest concern was that Faria hadn't started a family when he died. Then, Faria would become lonely. Lord Adair hoped to watch her marry a man who loved her and whom she loved in return, a capable and reliable man who could take care of and protect her. Only in that way could he leave the world peacefully. However, now, Faria knew that he didn't have to worry about any of that any longer. Not only could he walk her down the aisle, but he could also see her having kids and building her own family. He could even enjoy the happiness of 4 generations living together. When this thought flashed through Faria's mind, she couldn't help looking at Alex.